So I want to respect everybody's time. It's 10 after 8. We'll try to get through this information and we can call it an evening and get some rest. So the agenda, 8:10. So we'll get ready to do our pledge to the red, black, and green flag. This is actually some stuff I just copied and pasted, so it's not really accurate. But we'll look at some questions to keep in mind as we go through the preface and the foreword. We'll read right after we go through the questions, and then we'll have a brief discussion at the end. So with that, if you would, please come off mute, repeat after me. I commit my body, mind, and spirit.
I commit my body, mind, and spirit.
I commit my body
To the protection, defense, and security.
To the protection, defense, and security.
Of the red, the black, and green.
Of the red, the black, and the green.
I dedicate my life to the redemption of Mother Africa.
I dedicate my life to the redemption of Mother Africa.
And the liberation of her scattered Black children.
And the liberation of her scattered Black children.
I accept for myself and my descendants.
I accept for myself and my descendants.
The teachings of universal African nationalism.
The teachings of universal African nationalism.
And I promise that our children will be instilled.
And I promise that our children will be instilled.
With the purpose and knowledge of themselves as African people.
With the purpose and knowledge of themselves as African people.
In order that the cause of our struggle will neither falter nor fail.
In order that the cause of our struggle will neither falter nor fail.
Until all Black people are free and united.
Until all Black people are free and united.
Through one God.
Through one God.
One aim.
One aim.
One destiny.
And one destiny.
Race first.
Race first.
So all right. Thank you everybody for coming on this evening. Tonight is September 27, 2022. And this will be session 1 of our officers training. We open this up to all officers and aspiring officers as well. If there's individuals within our division that we know are serious about wanting to be officers, I would invite them to this course as well. Some of the questions that I want us to think about as we read through the foreword and the preface. First, how many aims and objectives there are in the UNIA. We should know this information, at least how many aims and objectives. We should know that by heart. As we read this, think about what members of the UNIA was the quote unquote course of African philosophy created for. What type of members, what type of leaders was this course created for? Number 3, which branch or division of the UNIA was responsible for establishing training departments? Whose responsibility is it in the UNIA to train the separate divisions throughout the nation and throughout the world? Name of the UNIA school established in Claremont, Virginia in 1926. What year was the first class of School of African Philosophy taught? So when did Marcus Garvey officially start teaching these courses? How many students were there in the first class? How many students out of the first class went on to become president generals, and what were their names? We should know. These are things to think about as we're reading through this information. Name of the students again. I think I got that twice, but which student was the leader of the first class, received the highest grade, and why is that important? Why was the best student, the one that received the highest grade, why was he or she hesitant to enroll in the course? What was the schedule of the course taught by Garvey? How many days and how often per day did our ancestors come together to learn this information? What type of time did they have to sacrifice to be able to go through this course. Who was appointed the authentic historian of the life and works of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, and who appointed him? But when it comes to the story of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, if it's not from the mouth of Marcus Garvey himself, we have to question these sources. And in this text, there is an individual that's been authorized as the official historian of the UNIA, and his text would be, not primary, but very critical, very important, and highly regarded within the UNIA as far as true factual information on Garvey and the UNIA. Who owns this course of African philosophy? Who does it belong to? So that's for the foreword. The preface, what compilation of work is considered the closest thing to a book that Marcus Garvey ever wrote? What does the course of African philosophy represent in the editor's opinion? The years of Marcus Garvey's birth and death and the exact dates, if you really want to be serious. Years that Garvey was in the United States. He's got a wonderful legacy and a wonderful impact here in the United States, but exactly how many years was he in the United States? When and where was the UNIA founded as an organization? How does the editor describe what the course of African philosophy is? What was the immediate purpose of the course? What was the requirement to pass the course taught by Garvey? How many lessons and subjects were there in total? And what's the difference in the type of lessons? What were Garvey's beliefs about the course of African philosophy? Garvey talks about how the white man has built up his system of superiority. Introduction also gives Garvey's views on Karl Marx and communism. It talks about Garvey's views on Jews. And it also gives an introduction to Garvey's position on the majority of Negroes. So these are some questions to consider. And there's one more slide. When was the second class of African philosophy taught, and how many graduates was in the second class? What was the original intent of Marcus Garvey's trip to the United States in 1916? When was the School of African Philosophy agreed upon by the UNIA, and what were the circumstances? Garvey's got a quote, but what rules the world and what carries the burden? So keep that in mind as we read. What was the first education endeavor that Garvey himself was able to conduct from start to finish? And last, what were Garvey's two quotes to the people in Detroit in 1937, the year he started to teach this course? Before I get started, any questions or comments before we get into the reading? Okay. First Vice President, Brother Macias, you did an excellent job reading for us last year. I didn't know if you wanted to, or if anybody wanted to volunteer to read. I am prepared to do it, but if someone wanted to read, that's open as well. Okay. All right. So tonight we're just going to be reading the foreword and the preface to Course of African Philosophy, Message to the People, Course of African Philosophy. And there's several different versions of this text, Message to the People, Course of African Philosophy. The one we hold to highest regard, and I would like to say within the whole UNIA, but I know I can say for 421 specifically, is the text edited by Tony Martin, and it's number 7 in the new Marcus Garvey library. So just be aware of the versions of this text and make sure you're getting the most authentic version of this course. So the white book with the blue ink is the one that we use at 421. So foreword. Foreword is by Honorable Charles L. James, President General, Universal Negro Improvement Association. And President General is the highest office position held by Marcus Garvey in the UNIA. In keeping with the constitutional provision in the aims and objects of the Universal Negro Improvement Association to establish schools and colleges for the racial education of our race, the founder and first President General of the UNIA, Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, made several attempts to educate some and re-educate others who would be charged with the responsibility of leadership in the UNIA. He sincerely felt that no one should be held responsible for his actions unless he or she is educated or trained to perform those responsibilities. And since the UNIA had become the largest responsible movement in racial history, its leadership should be thoroughly informed so that the proper information would be dispensed. Marcus Garvey was a man of vision, therefore his students had to be visionaries. One big thing that I like here is Garvey sincerely felt that no one should be held responsible for his actions unless he or she is educated or trained to perform those responsibilities. We can't expect our brothers and sisters to just come off the streets and, overnight carry out the legacy of Marcus Garvey in the UNIA. The roles and responsibilities of leadership in this government, they have to be taught, and it takes time. And individuals shouldn't be, as Garvey said, no one should be held responsible until they're properly educated or trained. And that's why we feel that this course is so important, as well as the orientation course offered by the parent body. But we as leaders, we have to understand that, we can't expect people to know it unless we've shown them how to do it. In every branch of the association, training departments were established. These included military training, training for nurses, and programs for juveniles. We recall that under his direction, a university was established at Claremont University in 1926. The Smallwood Quarry Industrial Institute was renamed Universal Liberty University. Students came from various sections to enroll in the first venture. Your humble servant was one of the first trustees. The success or failure of this great educational attempt is a matter of history. Many attempts were aborted, but the idea lived on through forums, mass meetings, group discussions, lectures, books, and pamphlets. Mr. Garvey's speeches were widely circulated for the racial education and culture of the people. And we still have a lot of that information, the speeches, lectures, philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. This information was being circulated and recirculated, and we have to assume this information was used to train and develop, the leaders that were studying it. But in 1937, after an extensive European tour and the establishment of the parent body in London, England, the founder called a regional conference at 355. Yeah, okay, sorry. I thought I had skipped the previous paragraph. In 1937, after extensive European tour and the establishment of the parent body in London, England, the founder called a regional conference at 355 College Street, Toronto, Canada. At this conclave, he selected the following officers of divisions who, in his judgment, were qualified to give him the nucleus of creating what he proudly named, quote unquote, the School of African Philosophy. Students of the first class were as follows: Arthur Clement Moore of Toronto, Canada; Charles Linnell James of Gary, Indiana; James R. Stewart, Cleveland, Ohio; Thomas W. Harvey, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania; Nathaniel Grissom, Chicago, Illinois; Sarah Richardson Isaacs, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania; Ethel Waddell of Chicago, Illinois; Eleanor White of Chicago, Illinois; Teresa E. Young of Cincinnati, Ohio; and Abram R. Roberts of Toronto, Canada. So these are the students of the first class, and the students listed in the second class. Students of the second class are also listed in detail. As the names were called, I had the qualifications required, but my ego told me that I had been an office boy in the parent body. I had shined Mr. Garvey's shoes. I had traveled short distances with him. I had heard all of his speeches since 1923. I had attended all the conventions since that time. I had visited him in prison, and I had become the youngest vice president of the famous New York local with over 40,000 members. I had been appointed by him president of the Newark division and state commissioner of New Jersey. And now, as president of the Gary, Indiana division, I felt that I knew it all and that Mr. Garvey's time could be better spent on someone else. To my surprise, I had the rudest awakening of my life. But when we look at the qualifications of Charles L. James, shined Garvey's shoes, traveled with them, heard all the speeches since 23, attended all conventions since 1923 through 1937, visited Garvey when he was in prison. This brother was the youngest vice president of a division with 40,000 members. He was appointed the president of Newark division and state commissioner of New Jersey. And he was now the president of Gary, Indiana. So a very robust resume, but at the end of the day, we have to listen to what Garvey says about Charles L. James's qualifications. And Garvey says, Mr. Garvey shocked me. He said to me publicly, quote, James, you don't know. I know that you don't know because I have not taught you, and you will take the course of African philosophy so that when you say, I know, you will know that you know because you will have been taught by me, end quote. From then on, there was no question. I enlisted for the duration. So we got to take a second, pause, and look at the qualifications of brother Charles L. James and make a comparison with ourselves. And I can already tell you, none of us stand up to brother Charles L. James, just for the simple fact of we were not alive when Garvey was alive. So we couldn't go see him in prison. We couldn't shine his shoes. We couldn't travel with him. We couldn't go to conventions with him. But if Garvey still felt that this brother who had been with him for 14 years was not qualified, how do you think Garvey would look at us as quote unquote leaders, presidents of divisions, Garveyites of our time? I would argue that Garvey would feel that we're not qualified until we go through the course, and probably a course taught by him specifically, but we can't do that. The class became one family. We ate together, roomed together, studied together, recognizing the professor as the chief architect of our intellectual destiny. As for me, it was a dose of humility mixed with the yearnings for knowledge. For 30 days and nights with 2 sessions per day, mass meetings at 8:00 p.m., studying until the early morning hours. We had no time for anything else but study, study, study. Then finally came graduation. Let the record show that I had received the highest grade. In every point of examination, I was graded E. My classmates all agreed that I was the leader of the first class in the School of African Philosophy. We were charged with guarding the written course with our lives. The unwritten course was also to be engraved on the tablets of our memory. As I write this foreword, I am sorry to announce that all my classmates of the first class have joined the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey and our other ancestors. With all our human frailties, I am convinced that this first class had not failed our teacher and that we have been a shining example to those who come after us. I've kind of went over this section quickly in the past, but I want to stop and make sure we understand, what is being said here. I think it's only a matter of grace and luck and destiny that out of the 17 students that Garvey was able to teach, and you'll see in the preface, it's a total of 17. Charles L. James was the only one that survived to retain the knowledge. And he just so happened to be the one with the highest grade. But after Garvey himself taught 17 individuals, I would argue again, he had done his job. the role of a leader in that type of position is to empower and educate the next generation. So Garvey did that. And out of those 17 people, only one was able to survive, Charles L. James. And with that, he published the book, published the course. I don't call it a book, I call it a course, but he published the course and made it public and, gave us as Africans a better opportunity to preserve this knowledge. It can still be lost to time, but we got to be thankful for the circumstances that allowed us to have this precious piece of information. Charles L. James says, this course is ours. Whatever is written, distorted, and injected by unauthorized persons using devices other than the proper way that was given to us by the founder and applying the benefits to their own personal benefit, please understand that, quote, there is a destiny that makes us brothers. None goes his way alone. All that we send into the lives of others comes back into our own, end quote. But as our motto says, one God, one aim, one destiny. There will not be any individual victories. We either succeed as a race or we fail as a race. So we as Garveyites, we are the protectors of this information in our time. Not only do we have to protect it, but we have to understand it. We have to interpret it, and we have to also make sure we teach it to the right people. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. As the only surviving graduate of the first class, it is important for me to protect the interests of those who preceded me into eternity, and knowing that there are forces that are trying to distort history. I hereby authorize Dr. Tony Martin, who has been recognized and appointed the authentic historian on the life and works of Honorable Marcus Garvey by the Universal Negro Improvement Association in convention, to publish the written document with the understanding that the right be preserved for future generations, which is the charge of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, founder. Let me hope that into whomsoever's hands these lessons fall, that they may use them wisely. For in these lessons, there is eternal life for Africans at home and abroad. Correction, it's not just Charles L. James, but also our brothers and sisters that attended convention. Marcus Garvey by the Universal Negro Improvement Association in convention. Dr. Tony Martin, who has been recognized and appointed the authentic historian, life and works of the Honorable Marcus Garvey by the Universal Negro Improvement Association in convention, to publish the written document. So it wasn't just Charles L. James, but the way things are supposed to be, we bring these requests to convention and we vote on it as a government and as a body, and all jurisdictions have a say. So that happened. They didn't say what time, but that happened in the past, and that's why we were able to have this text. Africans at home and abroad, in that they testify to God's greatest gift to our race in the person of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, proclaim it to the world, Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. So that's the foreword written by Honorable Charles L. James, President General of the UNIA-ACL. Any questions on the foreword before I go to the preface? No questions? Okay. So, preface of the Course of African Philosophy. The Course of African Philosophy is and this is written by Tony Martin, the editor. The Course of African Philosophy is a unique document. With the exception of his poetical works, it is the closest thing to a book that Marcus Garvey ever wrote. Let me stop there really quick because I want to pull up something. Let me see, pause share. see, new share. Yeah, okay. So when you look up the author of this text, this text is authored by Marcus Garvey himself. Now, when you look at the new share, where is it at? Book was copywritten in 1986. Preface also copywritten in 1986. Marcus Garvey transitioned in 1940. So this book wasn't released until 1986, but Garvey is still credited with being the author of this text. And as Dr. Tony Martin says, it's the closest thing to a book that Marcus Garvey himself ever wrote. So we value a lot of texts. We value a lot of literature and biographies about Garvey. But do we value the book that was written by Garvey himself? So as I said, for us at Division 421, well, I haven't said, but I will say it. I've said in the past, Message to the People Course of African Philosophy is one of our highest sources of information. And we put it right up there with the UNIA-ACL Constitution. So those two texts for us are the, as this book will say, the political will and testament of Garvey. And that's what we use. That's what we focus on when we try to carry out and go into the community, say that we're doing the work of Garvey. So with the exception of his poetical works, close thing to a book that Marcus Garvey ever wrote. Yet, 46 years after his death, it is being published here for the first time. It represents, as it were, the last political will and testament of a man who stands without equal in the history of the worldwide mobilization of African peoples. For Marcus Garvey did not merely organize the most massive Black movement in the history of the United States of America, he also organized the largest and most successful movement among African peoples in the Caribbean area. In fact, as a serious pan-Caribbean movement cutting across political and linguistic barriers, Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association has no serious challenger. Garvey's organization has an equally singular record in Africa, where it established itself oblivious of political and linguistic barriers in the European colonies of England, France, Belgium, and Portugal, as well as in the independent state of Liberia and the racist state of South Africa. In Central America, too, the UNIA spread with great rapidity from Mexico to Panama. In Canada, it entrenched itself coast to coast, from British Columbia to Nova Scotia. Scattered Africa fell within Garvey's organizational genius in every far-flung corner, whether Brazil, Australia, or Berry Dock, Wales. Garvey lived from 1887 to 1940. His years of all-encompassing triumph coincided with his sojourn in the United States from 1916 to 1927. His immigration to that country was, however, preceded by many long years of preparation of his life's work, long years of study, travel, and organizational work, culminating in the founding of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in his Jamaica homeland in 1914. After his expulsion from the United States in 1927, Garvey's organization underwent a long and slow decline as the chief struggled to hold together his fragmenting colossus. From inadequate headquarters in Jamaica and later in England, it was in 1937, 10 years after his deportation from the United States, 2 years after relocating to England, and 3 years before his death, that Garvey introduced his Course of African Philosophy. This was nothing less than a distillation of a lifetime of organizational experience. It contained a mixture of the techniques he himself had utilized to achieve success and an attempt to incorporate the hard lessons he had learned with the benefit of an unfortunate hindsight. Much of the Machiavellian quality of the document comes from this latter consideration. Garvey had experienced in a painful way the treacherous potential enveloped within human nature. If he had his life to live over, he seemed to be saying, his would be a less trusting, more cautious approach to people. The immediate purpose of the course of African philosophy was to train a cadre of UNIA leaders who would carry on the great work of the organization after Garvey's death. Garvey designed the 22 lessons in London and took them to Canada, where from August 24th to 31st, 1937, he conducted a regional conference for North American members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey's initial vehicle for imparting his accumulated experience was the School of African Philosophy, which met immediately after the conference. For most of the month of September 1937, Garvey trained a select group of UNIA organizers from the North American field. They spent 12 or more hours together every day. They listened to Garvey's lectures, ate together, did their homework together. During the course of the month, each student was required to write down each lesson in his or her own handwriting. The course, described by Garvey as, quote, a most rigid system of training, covered over 42 subjects. Much of it remained unwritten, for it was in the nature of a confidential in-house affair. Even the 22 written lessons reproduced here were guarded jealously from indiscriminate circulation. Garvey's overriding concern was to develop within his organization a fierce Afrocentric view of the world. And that's very important. We in America and scattered throughout, especially influence here in the West, we have an American-centric, or we have a Eurocentric view of the world. Garveyism is about removing that Eurocentric view and replacing it with the Afrocentric view. We've been brainwashed to believe that other people are better than us and more superior than us. And Garvey has to counter that with an Afrocentric view that reminds us, that we are the oldest people on this world, the first people on this world, and the closest thing to an image of God that you'll see on this planet. He accepted as given the fact that the white race had imposed its viewpoint on the world, and he thought that African people would have to adopt similar strategies in their own behalf. The race first position would tolerate no permanent allies from among other groups. Whites were to be manipulated where possible, but their propaganda was to be avoided and counteracted. Under no circumstances were they to obtain positions of influence or control over Black organizations. The course, reported the Boston Chronicle after an interview with Garvey, would instill, quote, an independent outlook, a philosophy entirely Negroid or African, void of anything that will subjugate the mind of the Negro. In the context of a confidential conclave, and with his lifetime experience behind him, Garvey could be much less guarded in his speech and would have been the case otherwise. While forcefully attempting to lead his people out of the domination of the white group, he could accordingly frankly admire their methods. Whites knew exactly what they wanted, and in the final analysis, subordinated much else to their pursuit of racial self-interest. Garvey says, quote, never swallow wholly what the white man writes or says without first critically analyzing it, end quote. He teaches that in lesson 1, but this did not mean that the African race should eschew the white group's methods. He says, quote, things that may not be true, he suggested in the same lesson, can be made so if you repeat them long and often enough. Therefore, always repeat statements that will give your race status and an advantage. That is how the white man has built up his system of superiority, end quote. Garvey in his heyday had to contend with white self-interest and opportunism from both right and left. He simultaneously praised Lenin and Trotsky for their work in the Soviet Union and resisted the unprincipled attempts of the Communist Party of the USA to bore from within his organization. Here, in the course of African philosophy, he presented his students with a rare evaluation of Karl Marx and communism. He said, communism, he said, was founded principally on the theory of Karl Marx, who knew very little about Negroes and who thought and wrote less about them. Communism seeks to put the government in the hands of an ignorant white mass who have not been able to destroy their natural prejudice towards Negroes and other non-white people. On the question of Jews as the question of communists, Garvey's race first position led him to a duality of attitude. In traditional Afro-American vein, he praised the Jews for their group solidarity and resented their positions of influence and power in certain economic and political aspects of Black life. He himself had to come into business contact with Jews at various times and with both good and bad results. He showed considerable pique during his trial for alleged mail fraud in 1923, where the presiding judge, Julian Mack, happened to be an important figure in North American Zionism. For the most part, there should be few surprises in these lessons for those already familiar with Garvey's ideology. What we find here is the standard fare of race first, whether in religion, literature, historical studies, intergroup relations, or in any other, self-reliance and nationhood. What is new and fascinating is the tone of many of the utterances coming as they do near the end of his life and in a confidential setting. Equally new in emphasis, though not in substance, is his insistent advocacy of discipline. Garvey emerges here beneath the flamboyance usually associated with his name, beneath the genius for organizing, beneath the oratorical eloquence for which he was legendary as an advocate of hard work, singleness of purpose, and self-discipline. The leader must strive to master his shortcomings, he says. The race must strive for excellence. The greatest men and women in the world burn the midnight lamp. Nor does he spare the lazy and unmotivated within his own group. Like a Booker T. Washington or Malcolm X or Elijah Muhammad, Garvey was not one to cover up the shortcomings of his own people. He says, quote, the majority of Negroes are ignorant, end quote. He says in lesson 21, but the intent, as always, is positive. It says, quote, as other people were willing to sacrifice their time and even their lives to Christianize our race, we must exercise patience and time to civilize our people, end quote. Garvey cannot, any more than anybody else, escape totally from the confines of his time. There is much assorted homely advice on diet, grooming, and love, among other things. Some of this is timeless, but some seems dated and passé from the perspective of 4 decades later. The lessons are not without their unexpected asides of dry humor either. Never try to make a speech on a hungry stomach, he warns. You may faint and die before you are finished. The first course of African philosophy was followed by examinations held on September 23rd, 1937. 10 students were successful. They were Arthur C. Moore of Toronto, Charles L. James of Gary, Indiana, James R. Stewart of Cleveland, Ohio, Thomas W. Harvey of Philadelphia, Nathaniel Grissom of Chicago, Miss Sarah Richardson Isaacs of Philadelphia, Miss Ethel Waddell of Chicago, Miss Teresa E. Young of Cincinnati, Miss Eleanor White of Chicago, and Abraham R. Roberts of Toronto. Joseph L. Gray of Charleston, Missouri did not graduate, but was continued as a student. This first group of graduates was immediately sent out as UNIA commissioners to the North American field. Some of them in due course instructed classes in the course of African philosophy. C.L. James taught the course in Gary, St. Louis, and New Orleans. James Stewart offered the course in Cleveland. 3 of the 10, Stewart, Harvey, and James, in turn occupied the organization's highest post, that of President General. In 1938, Garvey introduced the lessons as correspondence course and conducted from his London headquarters. His Black Man magazine published the names of 7 graduates in June 1939, its June 1939 number. 4 were from the United States, with 1 each from Nigeria, Uganda, and South Africa. They were Benjamin W. Jones of Philadelphia, J.O. Nwanolu of Onitsha, Nigeria, Mr. H.T. McNary of Detroit, D.S. Musoke of Kampala, Uganda, Mr. Ketura Paul of New York City, H. Eletintro of Cape Province, South Africa, and Miss E. M. Collins of New York City. Names of additional graduates were promised for the next issue of the Black Man, but no further issues were published. Garvey died the following year on June 10th, 1940. But again, I mean, from a Garveyite perspective, let me see, it says names of additional graduates were promised for the next issue of the Black Man. So we got to, as Garveyites, we got to pick that up become graduates ourselves and begin to teach this course so that we can continue to have graduates and people that carry on the legacy of Garvey through his last will and testament. Okay, the School of African Philosophy came at the end of many years of UNIA efforts.
We know what's coming in, for what purpose, and how that is still productive.
The School of African Philosophy came at the end of many years of UNIA efforts in the field of education. The organization's original aims and objects in 1914 included the establishment of educational institutions. Garvey's trip to the United States in 1916 was intended initially as a fundraising tour for the UNIA's projected agricultural and industrial school in Jamaica. At various times during the 1920s, the organization ran a Booker T. Washington University in Harlem, New York, a Liberty University in Claremont, Virginia, and in-service courses for UNIA civil servants. Branches in several countries ran elementary and secondary schools. Famous educators and scholars such as Hubert H. Harrison, J.A. Rogers, Carter G. Woodson, and many more were associated with the organization at one time or another. UNIA schools had always had the same ultimate purpose, namely the presentation of an Afrocentric perspective, or as we say today, race first. The School of African Philosophy had itself been in the making from as early as 1934. In that year, the UNIA's 7th International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World, meeting in Kingston, Jamaica, authorized the establishment of a college for the purpose of training leaders who are to supervise the work in different parts of the world. So that's what this course is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, quote unquote, a college for the purpose of training, for a purpose of training leaders who are to supervise the work in different parts of the world. Garvey says, quote, intelligence, said Garvey in the course of African philosophy, rules the world and ignorance carries its burden. The intelligence of which he spoke was not merely book learning, but the self-interested common sense which the race seemed to lack. He expressed it this way in a fictitious father-son dialogue in 1935. It says, quote, education, boy, is a mighty force. It is a weapon of human control. If you educate people in the idea that you have, they will react to your satisfaction, whether the education as a propaganda is right or wrong, end quote. It is fitting that the UNIA's last educational endeavor in Garvey's lifetime should have been the first that he was able to conduct from start to finish. So this course was the first educational endeavor that Garvey was able to conduct from start to finish. Garvey says, quote, I have given them all I know, he declared to the people of Detroit in 1937. And he said, quote, I'm trying to make everyone a Marcus Garvey personified, end quote. And that completes our foreword and preface. That's all we really had for today. I don't want to keep y'all longer than we need to, but when we get back together next week, we'll go over these questions, as I said, but how many aims and objectives there are, how many students were in the first class, how many students became president generals, what were their names. But we'll go over all of these questions next week, and all of the answers will come from the information that we just read. And then we will start lesson 1.
Brother John, could you please show the list of questions 1 through 7 again, please?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No problem. But yeah, we'll go over these questions next week and answer them together. We'll try to do a brief review of lesson 1 questions, and then we'll start reading lesson 1. Lesson 1 is very long, and it'll take us 2 weeks to get through it. But that's all I really got for today. Are there any questions, comments, or anything on what we read tonight? Well, do y'all want to go through the questions now or next week? Brother Art, how you feel?
Yeah, we can go next week. I want to go over and come up with some questions.
Okay. Okay. Any slides I need to go over again before I haven't like shared this. The people that took the course last year have a study guide that kind of has all of these questions and answers. So for you, Brother Art, like this is your first time seeing these questions. But we answered the questions in the reading and we'll bring it back up next week. So if you want, the best thing you can do is just go over the foreword and the preface again on your own and just try to pull out what you feel is the critical information that Garvey's trying to convey. Well, that would be Charles L. James and Tony Martin, the critical information they're trying to convey.
Yeah, that's what I want.
You breaking up a little bit, Brother Art. Do you have the text?
Okay.
Oh.
Brother Art, do you have the text?
Oh, I knew it was going to crack. I knew it.
Okay, well, we'll go with this stuff more next week, and we'll start reading lesson 1 next week as well. But I don't really have anything else for tonight. We achieved our goal. We got through preface and foreword, so I don't have anything else. And are there any last words before we move to close? All right. We'll get out of here before 9 o'clock. That works. If you would like, please come off mute and we will close out in the words of the motto of the UNIA. One God.
One God.
One aim.
One God.
One aim.
One destiny.
One destiny.
Africa.
One destiny.
Africa.
For the African.
For the Africans.
Those at home.
Those at home.
So at home.
And those abroad.
And those abroad.
All right. Praise First family. I will hopefully see you all next week.
Good night.
One piece.